So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone who went before me. You know, these are amazing conversations that I know I wasn't having in high school, and that I know that people around me weren't talking about when I was in high school and when I was a younger adult. And then thank you, obviously, to Lauren Anderson and the Josh Anderson Foundation for putting on this event and continuing to have these conversations, because I think, as most of us know, these are not things that are comfortable to talk about. These are not things that people or families or teenagers or young adults or adults want to talk about. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think similar to a lot of what's been said tonight is that, you know, in looking back at my life, I portrayed myself in one way for a long, long time and felt very, very differently underneath of it. And growing up, I felt very gray in the sense that life just wasn't that great for me. My highs weren't very high and my lows weren't very low. And life just kind of went along. And for me, the only time that I really felt a part of life or good about myself was playing sports. And unless I was on an athletic field, I felt very lonely. I felt very isolated. I didn't feel like I was a part of. And people looking in from the outside would have looked and said, wow, you know, Chris has friends and he does great in school and he's a 3-sport athlete. He looks like he has everything going on. And underneath of that, I was filled with fear and anxiety and sadness and depression. And it's a really interesting thing to look back on, because the way that I wanted you to see me was full of confidence and full of self-esteem, and that I was this very strong and self-conscious and self-aware person, but yet underneath of it, I was one of the loneliest people that I've ever met. And what happened with me was that very early on, you know, growing up in Annandale until I was in 8th grade and then moving to Great Falls, you know, I was introduced fairly quickly in my 8th grade year to alcohol and drugs. And, you know, so for somebody who never felt a part of, who felt anxious, who felt sad and depressed and lonely all the time, I was introduced to a bottle of alcohol and some weed, and my entire life changed. And from that moment on, I had a solution to the way that I felt. And these, again, were not conversations I was having with friends. And I'm still friends with my friends in high school today, you know, 15 years later, 18 years after meeting these people. And we didn't begin having the conversations that we're having tonight until we were in our older 20s. You know, and so I wasn't telling my friends I was lonely. I wasn't telling my friends I was anxious or depressed or scared or felt like I wasn't a part of. The way that I was able to connect was by, let's smoke a joint, let's drink a beer. And so I found that when I wasn't on the athletic field, if I could drink and get high, I felt okay. You know, and that's how I went through school. And it's funny, I joke and say I should have graduated from Langley. I should have graduated from about 5 high schools. But I couldn't stay in school. I couldn't manage the way that I felt. And what became really apparent really quickly was that no matter how many different combinations of substances I tried to put in my body, I still didn't feel okay. And that's a scary, really scary place to be. And I had every opportunity in the world. I had a wonderful family. I had wonderful friends. I had wonderful people around me. We had resources to help. If I needed to see a psychiatrist, I saw the psychiatrist. But I think a lot of what I've heard tonight too is I lied to them. I never was honest with these people. And I walked around from a very young age thinking that there was a problem with Chris. You know, and so what happened is, as I continued to get older in my high school years, I began to really isolate myself. And so I might have not been at home, but I would have been driving around in a car, getting drunk or getting high. I would have been trying to start a fight. I would have been trying to do something that would have made me feel anything different than the way that I felt. And for me, I turned a little bit different than people up here, I turned to the use of substances because that immediately changed the way that I felt. And I felt a part of, I felt okay with me. You know, and what happened as I continued to grow from a National Honor Society student, 3-sport athlete, looking at playing Division I athletics, you know, I ended up basically in Anacostia, DC, trying to rob drug dealers and ending up in handcuffs. You know, and so my adolescence was basically between being in and out of rehabilitation programs, jail, military schools, running away. You know, I don't feel like I had an adolescence because I had absolutely no idea who I was. And that's really the message here tonight that I'm here to say is I had to figure out who I was underneath of all this stuff. You know, who was Chris Bennett? Because I wasn't all these things I tried to portray myself as, but I also didn't know how to get to that person who I wanted to be. And I didn't think it was the cool thing to treat women well. I didn't think it was the cool thing to talk about your feelings. I didn't think it was the cool thing to do well in school. I didn't think it was the cool thing to do all these things that I look back on and say, wow, the really successful people in life, the really happy people in life, that's what they do. And I went from a standpoint of wanting to be cool because I felt that if I could be cool, I'd feel good about myself. And it didn't ever work. You know, and so I sit up here at 30. God, I'm a lot older than most people in this room. But the reality is at a very young age, I realized that I got to a point, and literally I remember it as clear as day, where my two options were that I can pull out a handgun and I can put it in my mouth and I can pull the trigger, or I can finally, for the first time in my life, ask other people for help. And that's a really scary place to be. I had been suicidal, at least thought about suicide, for about 3 years prior to that day. But it all came to a head, and I'm glad I made the decision that I did, which was to reach out to other people for help. You know, and those people who loved me and those people who cared about me, they were there for me when I was ready for that help. And so I sit up here and I'm blessed to have walked this amazing path of 23 years of my life filled of fear, anxiety, worry, depression, sadness, and to have lived the last 7 years of my life filled with these emotions and these feelings that I didn't even know I had. I didn't know what happiness was. I didn't know what it felt like to be okay with who I am today. And so it doesn't mean, like I think everyone else here has talked about, it doesn't mean that every day is a magnificent, wonderful day. It doesn't mean every day that I'm really excited about who I am today or where I am or what I'm doing or anything like that. But I can sit in here and say that I used to be the young man who sat in this room and laughed at 30-year-old Chris and said, that would never be me. That fucking loser, excuse my language. I can't even believe he would take his time to do that. Well, he must really have nothing better to do. And now I sit up here and I'm the loser trying to basically say to anyone in this audience that, you know, there are amazingly strong people up here sharing their stories who I know would be willing to shake your hand and to tell you their story. And I hope that, you know, maybe the stories tonight can inspire somebody for another day to reach out for help and feel inspired that there can be life and what you're feeling and experiencing right now is temporary. So I'm very thankful to be here and thank you all for having us.